Good morning and welcome to another episode of Sutta Study here at Empty Cloud Monastery. So this morning we'll be going through a discourse from the Anguttara Nikaya. But before we do that, we'll start with paying homage to the Buddhas. Namo tassa bhagavato arahato samma sambuddhassa. Namo tassa bhagavato arahato samma sambuddhassa. Namo tassa bhagavato arahato samma sambuddhassa. Buddhang dhammang sanghang namassami. Okay, so this morning we'll be looking at Anguttara Nikaya chapter 7, sutta number 70. So this is the Sakkacca Sutta, which is translated here as respectfulness. So this word Sakkacca can also mean carefulness, but that's, as you'll see when we start going through the sutta, that's not the meaning here. Here the meaning is the meaning of respectfulness. So as usual, I'll read through the sutta and periodically give some explanations as to what the sutta is talking about and how to relate it to our practice. And then I'll take any questions at the end. So the sutta begins. It says, then when Venerable Sariputta was alone in retreat, this line of thought occurred to him. What is it that, when a monk lives with respect and reverence for it, the unwholesome is abandoned and the wholesome is developed? So this is introducing the basic theme of the sutta. So the sutta is already beginning with the idea that when one has respect and reverence, then respect and reverence for a suitable object can be a basis for the development of right effort, for abandoning unwholesome tendencies, unwholesome thoughts, unwholesome behaviors, and cultivating wholesome tendencies, thoughts, and behaviors. So Venerable Sariputta is reflecting, he's thinking, so what is it that one should have respect and reverence for if one wants to abandon the unwholesome and develop the wholesome? And the sutta says, then he thought, when a monk lives with respect and reverence for the teacher, the unwholesome is abandoned and the wholesome is developed. So the teacher, so in Pali, teacher is sattha, and normally this is referring to the Buddha. So not just to any random teacher, but usually it refers specifically to the Buddha. So you could also say here, when a monk lives with respect and reverence for the Buddha, the unwholesome is abandoned and the wholesome is developed. And then Sariputta continues. So he gives a total of 7 items in this list. So being Anguttara Nikaya chapter 7, naturally it has a list of 7 in it. So then he says, when a monk lives with respect and reverence for the Dhamma, the unwholesome is abandoned and the wholesome is developed. Next, with respect and reverence for the Sangha. Then with respect and reverence for the training. So in Pali, that's Sikkha. So Sikkha, if you're a fully ordained monk, so whether that's a bhikkhu or a bhikkhuni, then the Sikkha would include all of the precepts that we follow, all of the Vinaya practices that we have, as well as whatever particular training principles are taught by your own teacher or in your own monastery. So every monastery has its own set of rules and guidelines which are part of the training at that particular monastery, and which are meant to help one to abandon unwholesome qualities and develop wholesome qualities. So if one is not a fully ordained monk, so not a bhikkhu or a bhikkhuni, Then the training refers to the precepts that you follow. So normally the 5 precepts of a lay person, possibly the 8 precepts. If you're a really committed lay person, you might take the 8 precepts. And again, as well as any practices that one is taking on as a way of strengthening one's development of Dhamma. So training here is meant to be a broad statement encompassing all of the particularly physical trainings that we engage in, but also the trainings of speech and mind, which are meant to help us to cultivate wholesome traits and to abandon unwholesome traits. Then the next 3 ones, so with respect and reverence for samadhi. So samadhi is unification of mind, commonly translated as concentration. So when the mind is completely unified and collected together and focused on one's meditation object, then this is samadhi. And samadhi is an extremely important quality in Buddhist practice. It's not something that can be discarded or dismissed or downplayed. So it's one of the 3 basic trainings. So sila, samadhi, and panya. So morality, samadhi, and wisdom. And of course, it's the 8th step of the Noble Eightfold Path. So the 8th of the 8 steps is samma samadhi. It's a right samadhi, correct concentration. And here he mentions when a monk lives with respect and reverence for samadhi, the unwholesome is abandoned and the wholesome is developed. In other words, we should have a really sincere respect for samadhi practices. So a reverence for the practices that lead to samadhi and the cultivation of samadhi. So there's a lot of practitioners these days who criticize or condemn or reject samadhi practices. Saying that we should just do insight practice, saying that insight meditation is what's really important and samadhi meditation is not important. But this directly contradicts what we see all throughout the suttas. So all throughout the suttas, we see this emphasis placed on the importance of samadhi, that without samadhi, one cannot develop insight. Without samadhi, one cannot develop wisdom. So samadhi is extremely important. The next trait, this is number 6. When a monk lives with respect and reverence for heedfulness, the unwholesome is abandoned and the wholesome is developed. So heedfulness is a translation of the Pali word appamada. So appamada literally means no pamada. So pamada means negligence, heedlessness, carelessness. So appamada then means vigilance, heedfulness, carefulness. So this mind which is very carefully paying attention to everything that we're doing, and in particular which is very vigilant to make sure that we don't fall into any unwholesome tendencies. So appamada is the mind which is very carefully watching everything that we're doing with body and speech, so that we don't do anything harmful. So constantly watching for the arising of unwholesome traits so that we can cut them off immediately. Constantly watching our environment and situations and noticing whenever we're tempted to do anything inappropriate so that we can restrain ourselves from inappropriate conduct. And in fact, the Buddha's last words were appamadena sampadeta. So appamadena means using appamada, so using vigilance or heedfulness. Sampadeta means attain the ultimate, consummate your practice, complete your spiritual journey. So that's sometimes translated as strive on with diligence, which is fair enough. It's a relatively accurate translation. And there's many discourses where the Buddha speaks about the importance of appamada. In fact, there's a whole chapter of the Dhammapada just about appamada, so heedfulness. And then the last quality on the list, this one is also quite interesting. It says, when a monk lives with respect and reverence for hospitality, the unwholesome is abandoned, and the wholesome is developed. So hospitality, in Pali, this word is patisantara. So this is a word that it's found in a few places in the suttas. The Buddha doesn't talk about this as often as he does many of the other wholesome behaviors and traits that he normally speaks about. But he does speak about it from time to time. The importance of hospitality. So this is especially important in monastic life. So we have many rules about how to be friendly and welcoming and hospitable towards our fellow monks. So there's a whole chapter in the Vinaya, which is just about the proper way to greet a visiting monk and how to be friendly and welcoming and hospitable to them, how to incorporate them into your monastery when they arrive, and how to look after them and take care of them. But the same principles, of course, also apply to lay people. So really considering how are we being friendly and welcoming and respectable or respectful and hospitable towards our guests, and actually towards everyone that we meet, but especially towards our guests, people that we're in a role of looking after. Also in a monastery, this also applies to people who come to visit the monastery, people who come to visit the temple. We practice hospitality. So sometimes there can be a tendency of thinking, oh, well, I'm at the monastery and I just want to be quiet and meditate and study and not talk to anyone. But that's not being hospitable. So instead, what we do is when people come, we greet them warmly. We ask who they are. We ask why they're interested in the monastery. We tell them about the programs that we have and how they can be involved. So this also is a practice of selflessness, of setting aside our normal self-centered concerns and being hospitable and welcoming and friendly towards others. So giving time and attention and care to other people. So then the sutta continues. So it says, Sariputta then thought, these qualities of mine are completely pure and clean. Perhaps I will go to the fortunate one and speak about these qualities. In this way, these qualities of mine which are completely pure will be considered even more pure. Just as a person who acquires a gold ornament that is completely pure and clean might think, this golden ornament of mine is completely pure and clean. Perhaps I will go to a smith and show them this golden ornament. In this way, this golden ornament of mine that is completely pure and clean will be considered even more pure. In other words, Sariputta reflected on himself and he saw that he was already practicing all 7 of these qualities perfectly. So there was nothing blameworthy about him in regards to these 7 qualities. But he also thought, if the Buddha approves of this, then that gives an extra layer of respectability to this. So that it's not just Venerable Sariputta coming up with something, but rather it's something which is has the stamp of approval from the Buddha himself. So then it would be considered even more precious, even more valuable. So the sutta continues. Then in the evening, Venerable Sariputta emerged from retreat, approached the fortunate one, paid respects to him, and sat to one side. While seated to one side, Venerable Sariputta said to the fortunate one, and he tells the Buddha the thought he had about these 7 qualities. And the Buddha replies, excellent, excellent, Sariputta. Sariputta, when a monk lives with respect and reverence for the teacher, the Dhamma, the Sangha, the training, samadhi, heedfulness, and hospitality, the unwholesome is abandoned and the wholesome is developed. So that's, again, the 7 qualities that were listed. And the sutta continues, when this was said, Venerable Sariputta said to the fortunate one, Bhante, I understand the detailed meaning of the fortunate one's brief statement. So here Sariputta is going to go into a bit more detail about these 7 qualities. So he says, Bhante, it is not possible that a monk who lacks reverence for the teacher will have reverence for the Dhamma. Bhante, a monk who lacks reverence for the teacher also lacks reverence for the Dhamma. So this is a basic principle. He's saying somebody who doesn't have reverence for the Buddha, someone who doesn't have this deep honor and respectfulness towards the Buddha, is also not going to have reverence for the Dhamma. So this is indicating the importance of having not just an appreciation for the Buddha as a teacher, but a deep reverence for a Buddha as being the highest kind of being, the ultimate being, a being who has the utmost purity, the utmost wisdom, the utmost compassion. So cultivating a mind of adoration for the Buddha, a mind of, again, deep reverence for the Buddha. Because if we have deep reverence for the Buddha, then we have deep reverence for the Dhamma. So we can also see the opposite. So when somebody doesn't have much reverence for the Buddha, then they're more likely to play loose and fast with the Dhamma, to go through editing and altering and changing aspects of the Dhamma to fit their own opinions. Then he says, Bhante, it is not possible that a monk who lacks reverence for the teacher and for the Dhamma will have reverence for the Sangha. So similarly, if somebody doesn't have this deep reverence and adoration for the Buddha and for the Dhamma, then why would they care so much about the Sangha? They're not likely to see the value of monastic life. So monastic life is a natural expression of the Dhamma. So ultimately, the Dhamma is all about renunciation. It's all about letting go. And it's about a deep commitment to morality, samadhi, and wisdom. And this is exactly what monastic life is all about. It's about renunciation, it's about morality, it's about samadhi, and it's about wisdom. So one who has a deep respect for the Dhamma will naturally also have a deep respect for the monastic Sangha. So one who has deep respect for the Buddha will have deep respect for the Dhamma, and one who has deep respect for the Dhamma will have deep respect for the Sangha. Then next he says, it is not possible that a monk who lacks reverence for the teacher, the Dhamma, and the Sangha will have reverence for the training. So this also is quite natural. Why do we have so much reverence for the training? Why do we love these precepts so much? Why do we love living in restrictive environments like monasteries? Why do we love the guidelines and schedules of a monastery? It's all terribly inconvenient. Precepts, from one perspective, precepts and rules and schedules are constrictions. They're constraints that limit our freedom. So it's terribly inconvenient, quite uncomfortable even. But we have reverence for the training because we recognize that the training is how we live the Dhamma. We recognize that the training is the physical embodiment of the Dhamma. We recognize that the training is what helps us to cultivate the noble qualities of the noble Sangha. They're what helps us to develop the path to awakening so that we can be more like the Buddha. So this deep reverence for the Buddha, the Dhamma, and the Sangha then naturally leads to a deep reverence for the training, for the precepts and training rules and guidelines and schedules that we have. And similarly, if we lack reverence for the training, if we don't care so much about the precepts and guidelines and practices, then that probably indicates that our faith and adoration for the Buddha, Dhamma, Sangha is also on the weak side. And that's something that we need to work on developing. So our relationship to the training rules and practices can give us some indication of just how strong our faith in Buddha, Dhamma, Sangha really is. And again, an indication that we might need to work on practices that strengthen our respect and admiration for Buddha, Dhamma, and Sangha. Next, Sariputta says, it is not possible that a monk who lacks reverence for the teacher, the Dhamma, the Sangha, and the training will have reverence for samadhi. So this also is interesting. Why would somebody not be interested in samadhi? Well, samadhi is, first off, it's an expression of the Dhamma, as mentioned. Second, it's a quality that the Buddha had perfected as part of his path to awakening. So if somebody doesn't have much reverence and respect for Buddha and Dhamma, then of course they're not going to have much respect for samadhi. That's pretty clear. Also, the Sangha, one aspect of monastic practice is in fact samadhi practice. So trying to unify and focus and concentrate the mind. And also the trainings are meant to support samadhi. So why do we engage in practices like not listening to music, not watching movies? Why do we engage in practices like celibacy? Why do we practice restraint from using electronics and communication devices? Why do we have schedules which involve meditation periods, often many hours a day of meditation? Why do we have periods of silence? Why all these aspects of the training? Well, one thing is that they support samadhi practice. It's very difficult to develop strong samadhi if you're listening to music and watching TV all day long. It's very difficult to have strong samadhi if you're engaging in hours of conversation every day. It's very difficult to have good samadhi if we're unrestrained and careless. So the training principles directly support the development of samadhi. So if we're not much interested in samadhi, then that's probably a sign that we're not much interested in the training rules either. And if we're not much interested in the training rules, well, that's a sign we're not much interested in samadhi. So these are not something that you can pull apart. Over the years, I've met quite a number of people who've been practicing meditation for years or even decades, and who complain that their samadhi is still extremely weak. Say, oh, I've been practicing for 20, 30 years, but I still haven't reached even first jhana. My samadhi is very weak. And the question is, well, what are you doing with the rest of your time? Your meditation technique might be perfect. You might actually have exactly the right meditation method for developing samadhi, for entering jhana. But if the rest of your life is messy and noisy and complicated, then of course you're not going to get samadhi. Of course not. Of course your mind is going to be similarly messy and complicated. Then the next one, he said, it is not possible that a monk who lacks reverence for the teacher, the Dhamma, the Sangha, the training, and samadhi will have reverence for heedfulness. So once again, what is heedfulness? Heedfulness is carefully watching our mind at all times so that we can catch any arising of unwholesome tendencies, so that we can prevent ourselves from any arising of unwholesome tendencies. And this is necessary for samadhi. In order to enter samadhi, one's mind must be completely pure and clean, at least temporarily. And for the mind to be completely pure and clean, we must watch it very closely for an extended period of time. Watching very closely to see any defilement or distraction arising so that we can cut it off immediately. And that's also an expression of the training. Our training is meant to help us. So the precepts and rules and guidelines and schedules are meant to give us a structure that helps us to practice heedfulness, that helps us to constantly observe the mind and to see whenever we're straying into dangerous territory. And finally, Sariputta says, it is not possible that a monk who lacks reverence for the teacher, the Dhamma, the Sangha, the training, samadhi, and heedfulness will have reverence for hospitality. So why would we care about other people? Seems like kind of an odd thing to ask, but you'd be surprised how often this comes up, especially in Theravada circles. Why would we care about other people? Isn't Buddhism all about attaining awakening for ourselves, by ourselves, for ourselves? Why would we care about anybody else? But if one is thinking in that way, it indicates that one has a fundamental lack of understanding of the Dhamma. So ultimately, what is the Dhamma? What is Dhamma practice? It is the practice of relinquishing all self-identity, all self-attachment, all self-view. What is the primary characteristic of the Buddha's awakening? Is that he abandoned all self-attachment, all self-identity. What is the Sangha trying to do? We're trying to abandon self-identity, self-attachment. Why do we practice samadhi? Because it helps us to get the strength of mind to abandon self-identity and self-attachment. So the natural tendency of mind of one who abandons all selfishness is selflessness. So caring, kindness, compassion. And hospitality is one manifestation of that. So, and this also works in the other direction. So actively practicing hospitality is also a way that we cultivate kindness, caring, compassion, and selflessness. Then Sariputta puts this in another way. So going through these same 7 items, but putting it in a positive direction. He says, it is not possible that a monk who has reverence for the teacher will not have reverence for the Dhamma. A monk who has reverence for the teacher also has reverence for the Dhamma. In other words, if you love the Buddha, if you admire enlightened beings, if you respect enlightened beings, then you will respect the teachings of enlightenment, the teachings of how to attain that same degree of purity, that same wisdom and compassion. And he says, it is not possible that a monk who has reverence for the teacher and the Dhamma will not have reverence for the Sangha. In other words, if you love the Buddha and you love the Dhamma, then naturally you will also have a deep appreciation and respect for the monastic community. Because you'll recognize that the monastic community is a natural expression of the Dhamma taught by the Buddha. You'll recognize that this is a natural progression. So a Buddha arises in the world, an awakened being arises in the world, and they teach the Dhamma. And those who wish to follow the Dhamma as thoroughly and completely as possible naturally become monastics. They join the monastic community. And then he says, it is not possible that a monk who has reverence for the teacher, the Dhamma, and the Sangha will not have reverence for the training. In other words, if you have deep admiration, appreciation, and respect for Buddha, Dhamma, and Sangha, then you will recognize that the training is a natural progression from that. So again, the precepts, the guidelines, the schedules, the rules that we follow are all ways that the Sangha tries to embody the Dhamma, ways that the monastic communities try to take the principles of Dhamma and apply them to every moment of our lives. So it's natural. If you have a deep admiration for the Buddha, Dhamma, and Sangha, then you will also have a deep admiration and respect for the training practices that the Sangha follows. Next, he says, it is not possible that a monk who has reverence for the teacher, the Dhamma, the Sangha, and the training will not have reverence for samadhi. One who has reverence for teacher, Dhamma, Sangha, and training also has reverence for samadhi. So again, this is pointing to the critical importance of samadhi practice. So if you know people who dismiss the importance of samadhi, you can quote this line to them. One who has reverence for the Buddha, Dhamma, Sangha, and the training also has reverence for samadhi. So having a deep respect for samadhi practice, even if our own samadhi is not strong, or even if we ourselves are not much interested in practicing samadhi, we can have a deep respect and admiration for it. Appreciation for those who practice samadhi. Next, he says, a monk who has reverence for the teacher, the Dhamma, the Sangha, the training, and samadhi also has reverence for heedfulness. So as mentioned before. And finally, a monk who has reverence for the teacher, the Dhamma, the Sangha, the training, samadhi, and heedfulness also has reverence for hospitality. So then the sutta ends with the Buddha approving of Sariputta's statement and repeating it. And that's the end of the sutta. So that's this discourse. So another lovely brief discourse from the Anguttara Nikaya. So laying out this natural progression of how reverence for the Buddha leads to reverence for the Dhamma, for the Sangha, for the training, for samadhi, for heedfulness, and for hospitality. So I think we'll end there, and I'll take any questions or comments that you have. So please go ahead and type in any questions that you have, and I'll answer them as best I can. Thank you. And also, the people here at the monastery are also welcome to ask questions if you wish. So we have a couple questions have appeared. Bobby Cortez asks, what does sitting to one side mean? Commonly, there was a practice that when you went to visit a teacher, instead of sitting directly in front of them, you would sit slightly to one side. Again, it's just an old sign of respect that comes from ancient India, but it's also quite practical. So if you have a line of people that are all directly in front of you, then you can only see the first person in the line. But if you have two lines of people that are both a little bit off to one side, then you can actually see every single person in the group. So there's also a practical element to this, which I find quite relevant. But yeah, it's an old sign of respect from ancient India. Then Gita asks, restraint and training helps one to transform and transcend in the Noble Eightfold Path and perfect our sila, samadhi, and panya. Yeah, that's correct. Yeah, self-restraint and the training practices that we follow are they're ways of practicing the Noble Eightfold Path. So they're not separate from the Noble Eightfold Path. They are expressions of the Noble Eightfold Path. And Gita says, also this training helps one to develop nibbida, which is disenchantment, and truly see impermanence, unsatisfactory nature of life, and no self/emptiness. Yeah, so this is the practices that we engage in. So the training principles that we follow, the practices of morality, the development of samadhi, these are all things which support one in seeing things as they really are. So there's many suttas where the Buddha talks about how morality is a necessary prerequisite for samadhi, and how when one has strong samadhi, then one is capable of seeing things as they really are. So that would include, as you say, seeing the three characteristics of impermanence, unsatisfactoriness, and not self. Then Naval says, Bhante, any tips for lay people to strengthen samadhi? Yes. So as I mentioned, one of the most important things is living a very quiet, simple, and peaceful life. So one of the most important things, if you want to have strong samadhi, one of the most important things is stop listening to music. Cut music out of your life completely if you can. Very important, especially vocal music. So any kind of singing it tends to stick in the mind and destroy your samadhi. But also instrumental music is not particularly good because it tends to create an underlying fluctuation in the mind, which makes it very hard for the mind to come to stillness. So also avoid engaging in much conversation. And when you do have conversation, only talk about Dhamma. If there's some practical things you need to talk about, such as where are the scissors, and that's okay. But sitting around chatting about sports and politics is not good for samadhi. It's okay to talk about Dhamma, But even then, make sure you're not just using it as a way of wasting time. So avoid unnecessary conversation. And another important one is to practice kindness and equanimity. So being kind and gentle to every being that you meet, being kind and gentle to yourself as well, and try not to be disturbed by any experience that you have. So whether pleasant or unpleasant. So not chasing pleasant experiences and not backing away from unpleasant experiences. So these are all things which will help your samadhi a lot. It also helps if you have a quiet job which doesn't stir up your mind. It helps if you don't have roommates, or if you do have roommates, that your roommates are quiet, peaceful people, preferably Buddhist practitioners. That helps a lot. Of course, follow the 5 precepts very carefully. 5 precepts are extremely important. 8 precepts is even better. Celibacy helps a lot for samadhi. Though if you're a layperson, then you may not be so interested in celibacy. It's very rare that I meet lay people who are interested in celibacy, though I've met a few over the years. There's a few out there. Yeah, these are all things that help a lot. Of course, meditating a lot helps tremendously. If you want strong samadhi, you need to do a lot of meditation. It's not something that comes if you just do a couple hours a day. In Tibetan Buddhism, they say that if you really want to develop good meditation, then you should meditate for at least 4 hours a day for the rest of your life. And I think that's actually quite reasonable. I can really tell a difference between meditating 2 hours a day and meditating 4 hours a day. It makes a tremendous difference. Of course, more is generally speaking better. Then Ayasoma, who I presume is watching from somewhere else in the monastery, Ayasoma asks, can you clarify what the difference is between appamada, sati, and sampajanya? I actually think this would be a great topic for Bhante Sumita to go into. I'm sure he could give probably a whole hour's talk just on the difference between appamada, sati, and sampajanya. Would you be willing to do that one of these days? He's nodding. Okay, so we can put Bhante Sumita down for that topic. In the meantime, I'll give you a very brief statement. So sati is mindfulness. This is our basic quality of paying attention. Sampajanya is commonly translated as clear comprehension or all-around awareness. This actually is this particular word, there's a lot of debate about what it's talking about. Sampajanya in the suttas almost always comes together with sati. I'm actually not sure it's ever spoken about separately from sati. But sampajanya is normally considered to have an aspect of wisdom to it. So it's awareness, but awareness not in a dull receptive sense, but an awareness that has a clear, thorough understanding. So the prefix sang can mean thorough or all around, and pajanya means to know or to understand. It's actually related to the word panya. So sampajanya is this thorough, clear, all-around knowing. So you're not just aware of what's happening, but you have a deep understanding of its significance. And sati and sampajanya are prerequisite qualities for appamada. So in order to be vigilant and heedful, then you need to be paying attention and you need to understand what's going on. But paying attention and understanding does not necessarily mean that you're going to be vigilant and heedful. So you do need to make an effort. So for example, you can be completely mindful of anger arising in your mind, completely mindful as you fuel and build up that anger, and completely mindful as you start yelling obscenities at the person in front of you. So just having mindfulness does not mean that you have appamada, does not mean that you have heedfulness. Heedfulness is that extra trait which is like, okay, I'm aware of the anger arising, and I'm aware that this is really bad, and I'm aware that I need to do something about it right away. And you choose to pull back from that anger and refrain from fueling it. That would be the function of appamada. So that's my 2-minute explanation as a preview to Bhante Sumitta's 42-minute explanation coming up soon. And Anita asks, hospitality as a layperson can sometimes be hard outside of Sangha. Would appreciate some suggestions. Well, the basic quality of hospitality is kindness and consideration. So pay attention to the people that you encounter. Try to see how you can be kind to them. Try to see what would be appreciated, what would be supportive for them. And do what you can. Be creative. So do the best you can with the situations that you have. So whoever you encounter, try to practice kindness and consideration. By the way, fun fact about the word translated as hospitality. So patisantara, it actually comes from the word that means to lay out a rug. So a bit like when we say like, oh, roll out the red carpet. It's kind of a similar literal meaning to the word. It's like putting out the red carpet for someone. So it indicates that quality of like making an extra effort to make other people feel welcomed and cared about. Then Upasika Tara, good to see you again, by the way. Upasika Tara asks, how do monasteries balance hospitality and seclusion? Well, it depends on the monastery, but most monasteries have times when the residents can be alone. Or times of silence when the monastery is in silence for periods of time. And that's what helps to keep us sane. So we have times when we greet others and converse with others. Times when we help each other out with making the monastery a comfortable place to live. But also times when we practice seclusion, when we spend time alone, in silence, so not interacting with others. So every monastery has its own ways of doing that. Depending upon the size and structure of the monastery, it varies from place to place. And also depending on the focus of the monastery. So some monasteries are very much about providing services to the lay community, and other monasteries are very much about solitary, secluded practice. And some monasteries are some blend of the two. Most monasteries are some blend of the two. Gita asks, can we chant? That is not considered music because we are chanting the Buddhist teachings. That's correct. Chanting is fine. In fact, if you're having a hard time giving up music, then try replacing it with recordings of Buddhist chanting. That can be quite a skillful and appropriate way of starting to break your addiction to music and cultivate an appreciation for Buddhist practice. And that's the last question from online. Do any of the residents have questions? Jens, go ahead.
I have a question, Bhante. Just your thoughts on the direction going in the reverence and respect going in the other direction. I was just thinking of my own entrance and study of the path. Initially, it was a reverence for the Sangha, for the monastics that I met, which led to even greater respect for the teachings that led them there, which even today, when I read the suttas, it gives even more respect for the Buddha. So I was just wondering your thoughts on, do you see it sometimes going in that direction?
Yeah, definitely. I think that the list that the Buddha gives is not necessarily one way only, but that actually respect and reverence for any of those 7 qualities can then nurture one's reverence for any of the other 6 qualities. So if you have a deep appreciation for samadhi, for example, then that will lead you to have a deeper appreciation for all 6 other qualities as well. So even hospitality. So you might think, oh, hospitality, all that like helping other people, that must be really bad for samadhi. But actually it's quite the opposite. because that develops in you this deep, peaceful appreciation of your own goodness. And also, it creates an atmosphere of non-contention, an atmosphere of harmony and mutual appreciation, which also is very important for samadhi. So one of the most destructive things for samadhi practice is contention. So an atmosphere of non-contention is very important for good meditation practice. Okay. Okay, any other questions or comments? Okay, good. So looks like that's it for this morning. So this evening we'll have a Dhamma talk by Bhante Sumitta. So please go ahead and log in at 7:30. We'll have Bhante Sumitta with us for the whole Vasa. So we'll be having a series of talks from Bhante Sumitta on a variety of topics. So please keep an eye out for that. Also, we'll have a number of guest monastics, so joining in from other places around the world. So coming up soon, we'll have a series of talks by Shifu Simplicity, who's a senior bhikkhuni from the Taiwanese Chan tradition, giving a series of talks on Bodhidharma's explanation of Buddhist practice. So that will be a wonderful thing to check in for, as well as some other teachings from both the resident monks and also monks from other places. So please keep joining in, again, 8 a.m. and 7:30 p.m. New York City time, Wednesday, Thursday, and Friday. And also come and join in at the monastery on the weekends if you're close by and have the opportunity. So we'll go ahead and end the morning with 3 sadhus. Sadhu, sadhu, sadhu. And we'll see you next time.